Leviticus has been fun so far, for me at least. And it is about how to organize Israel after they have come out of the land of Egypt. They've been enslaved. They've been forced to do all these tasks for the Egyptians to build up their storehouse cities, to make them richer as they got poorer. And now in Leviticus, they are free, and so they need a way to order society. And one of the key things that God is going to tell them in Leviticus 17 through 20 is, you need to look different than all of the nations around you. You need to look different than the Egyptians, of which you've just come out. You need to look different from the Canaanites to which you are going. And so one of the things that's emphasized in Leviticus 17 through 20 is establishing particular cultural practices to make them stand out from the rest of the world.
17 to 20?
Yeah, Leviticus chapters 17 through 20. Sorry. All four chapters there. 17, 18, 19, and 20. Yeah, right. Now we got a long ways to go today. All right. So let's move through this text here. Beginning in verse 1. This chapter is only 16 verses long. And we could really summarize it quickly, but we're just going to go through the first few verses to get the idea. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and to his sons and to all the sons of Israel." So notice he begins, "Speak to the priests," and in doing so, you're speaking to all the sons of Israel. This message is to the priests, but it's for all to hear. The priests are the ones that are going to worry about specifically doing these offerings and whatnot, but all of Israel needs to hear this so they know how to approach God and know how it's supposed to look and know what it means. Okay. Any man from the house of Israel who slaughters an ox or lamb or a goat in the camp, or who slaughters it outside the camp, and has not brought it to the doorway of the tent of meeting to present it as an offering to the Lord before the tabernacle of the Lord, blood guiltiness is to be reckoned to that man. He has shed blood, and that man shall be cut off from among his people. Now, if an individual, if they kill an ox or a lamb or a goat, and it's not, they're offering it, basically they're trying to offer up a sacrifice, and they don't bring it to the tabernacle, then they've basically shed blood for no reason, and so they're to be guilty. This is kind of interesting, because I don't know if anybody here does necessarily, but does anybody ever here ever go hunting, or maybe even fishing? Well, I know Johnny goes fishing, but when you bring in the fish, you either let them go or you go eat them. You don't just catch all the fish and go throw them off the side of the road, right? And when you hunt, you don't go hunt and just waste the meat. At least you're not supposed to. When you go and hunt, you're supposed to take the meat and eat it and enjoy what you've brought home. What you have here is wastefulness, and so wastefulness is condemned in this text. He says the reason is so that the sons of Israel may bring the sacrifices, which they were sacrificing in the open field, that they may bring them into the Lord at the doorway of the tent of meeting to the priest, and sacrifice them as priest offerings to the Lord. So instead of keeping this outside of the tabernacle, we have to bring some order to this. It can't just be mindless sacrifices. There's got to be the procedure. And then what do the priests do with the meat from the sacrifice? That's for the priests. So if you do this, you're actually stealing from the priests in a sense. And so this structure was put forth not just to centralize everything and put order to everything, so you don't just have people offering up stuff left and right with no procedures, but procedures were put in place to benefit the priests, and also to establish a singular place that is holy to which they bring their offerings. In the following verses, he gives some instructions on how to sprinkle the blood and why you shouldn't sacrifice to goat demons. Verse 7. That needed to be clarified, right? No more sacrificing to goat demons. That's a relevant message for today, of course. If anybody's here is, of course, sacrificing to goat demons. But then all through this text, he just goes on and on and on. Anybody that's visiting in your lands that sacrifices, they can't just go out and sacrifice. They got to bring it to the temple, to the tabernacle. All right, if anybody eats any blood, in verse 10 and following, I'll set my face against that person. On and on and on he goes in this text. If you touch blood, this way. If you kill something and you don't cleanse yourself, this way. If you don't purify yourself from things that you touch that are dead, then this, and this needs to be done. Chapter 17 is basically centralizing the sacrificial system to Aaron and to his sons and no one else, but it also serves to stand as a barrier in Israel between life and death. That's what a lot of these things were to do, were to stand as barriers between life and death, to align Israel with life instead of them dealing with dead animals and blood and things like that without being purified. All right, that's really, chapter is kind of short, and there's not much in it that we haven't already discussed in the previous chapters. But when we get to chapter 18, now we get into the stuff that is a little bit more, I guess, not relevant to us today, but just more interesting for our purposes. So the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God." This expression, not specifically this exact expression, but this idea of identifying who the Lord is, his name, saying, I am the Lord, do this, this, and this, for I am the Lord, do this, this, and this because of my name, is mentioned 27 times between chapter 18 through chapter 20. So this expression, I am the Lord your God, is mentioned 27 times in these chapters. Maybe one or two more, maybe one or two less, but that's the count that I got. So that's the biblical count. All right, I'm the Lord your God. Now, why is it so important to say I'm the Lord your God? You don't have to read all these, but look at the blue. You ready? It's not as much in this chapter, but you'll see it. Look at all the blue. I'm the Lord your God. All those are I'm the Lord your gods that are highlighted in blue there. Why do you think that's so important? That's right. They are a people that are representatives of God here on earth. It was their goal, their responsibility, to body forth, to be the light to the nations, to show forth to the people who it was, who it is that's the true God. In the Ten Commandments, one of the commandments says, "You shall not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain." That's not just the idea of saying the Lord's name without any meaning behind it, but that's the idea of not even is saying that you're a Christian, in our case, saying that you're a follower of the one God, in their case, and not actually living in a way that's a proper representation of that God. In a sense, what he's saying here is, you're embarrassing me if you don't stand out from the nations. Why have I called you out to live by my name if you're not actually going to live by it? It's kind of like whenever you are with with brothers or sisters at the grocery store, or a mom's there with her child, or a dad's there with his kid, and he says, "Son, you're embarrassing me," or you kind of feel bad because your little crazy brother's over there doing all kinds of stuff, and you're going, "Man, everybody's going to think my family's nuts if he keeps doing that." Well, that's kind of what God is doing in a sort of a comical sense. God is saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, I am the Lord your God. You shall not do what is done in the land of Egypt, where you lived, nor are you to do what is done in the land of Canaan, where I am bringing you. You shall not walk in their statutes. You are to perform my judgments and to keep my statutes, to live in accord with them." Whoops, there's another. "I am the Lord your God." So make that 28. "And so you shall keep my statutes and my judgments, by which a man may live if he does them." Again, I am the Lord. And all in these commands, you shouldn't do this. Why? Because I am the Lord. All down here towards the end again, verse 21. So there's 29. See, I told you we missed some. Again, he says, "I am the Lord." Verse 20, verse 30. You're not to do any of these things. Why? Because I am the Lord your God. So all again, over and again and again, you're not to defile yourself this way. You're not to participate in this sin. You're not to participate in this abomination. Why? Because I am the Lord your God. The whole point of this was for Israel to be accurate representations of God to the world around them. He called them out for a specific purpose. So he says, "Do not defile yourselves by any of these things, for by all these the nations which I am casting out before you have become defiled. For the land has become defiled, therefore I have brought its punishment upon it, so the land has spewed out its inhabitants. But as for you," he says, "you are to keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien who sojourns among you. For the men of the land who have been before you have done all these abominations, and the land has become defiled, so that the land will not spew you out, he says in verse 28, should you defile it, as it has spewed out the nation which has been before you. So the idea here is, if you don't continue in the way that I've set before you, if you make yourself indistinguishable from the nations by doing the same things that they're doing, then I'm going to cast you out of the land yourself. You're going to receive punishment for this because you aren't fulfilling this covenant that we have with one another. I am your God, you are my people. I bless you. You represent me accurately here on earth. And so part of this repetition, I am the Lord your God, has to do with them taking the name of the Lord seriously, which means them taking their identity seriously. When we use the name Christians, there's a key phrase, there's a key word built into that word. Christians, right there. Christ. If you call yourself a Christian, which saying that you are a representative of the Christ, and you behave in a way, which is not becoming of a Christian, then what you're doing is you're taking the name of Christ in vain. You're taking the name of the Lord in vain. And so if your life is not distinguishable from those around you, then you aren't fulfilling the duties of a Christian. All right, let's look at chapter 19. Here's where it really gets heavy with the statements of, I am the Lord your God. Speak to all the congregations of the sons of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. All right, now whenever Jesus says in Matthew chapter 5, be perfect, even as your heavenly Father is perfect, you see where he's getting this from. He's telling them in Matthew chapter 5, here's the way that I want you to live, because this is the way that God behaves. And if you are to be an accurate light to the world, as he says in Matthew 5, then you need to be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect. And so Moses tells Israel, you need to be holy because I am the Lord your God. I, the Lord your God, am holy. If you call yourselves representatives of Yahweh and you don't behave as such, then you aren't only discrediting yourself, you're in a sense discrediting me. He says in verse 3, every one of you shall reverence his father, mother, and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am the Lord your God. Do not turn to idols, or make for yourselves molten gods. I am the Lord your God. All this has to do with being a proper light to the world. If you go down to verse 9, here's another command that he gives. Now when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest, nor shall you glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather the fallen fruit of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the needy and for the stranger. And again, I am the Lord your God. He's going to make the point later on. The reason why you behave in this way towards the poor and towards the afflicted and towards the, as he calls it, the sojourner in their land, is because they at once were sojourners in somebody else's land. They at once were poor and afflicted and cast out and downtrodden. And so God wants them to behave towards those people as he has behaved towards them. He says in verse 11, you shall not steal, nor deal falsely, nor lie to one another. You shall not swear falsely by my name, so as to, here he comes again, so as to profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. So again, this whole thing comes back to profaning God's name, taking God's name in vain by not behaving in a way that is suitable for Israel to behave. In verse 13 and 14, again, you shall not oppress your neighbor, nor rob him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning. In other words, if somebody is, if you have a person that you've hired for the day, don't withhold the wages from them. Don't send them home basically empty. They came and did an honest day's work. Make sure that they get what they need so that they can take care of their family. Here's one, verse 14. You shall not curse a deaf man. nor place a stumbling block before the blind, but you shall revere your God. I am the Lord. It's kind of like the joke goes. The joke goes, what do you say about a deaf shark? Well, anything you want, he can't hear you, right? And so what God is saying here, you should have so much respect for your fellow man that if there's somebody that's deaf around you, don't take that opportunity to talk badly about them. Don't take that opportunity to curse them. Treat them just as you would someone who can hear you. Now, what does that say about just conversations that you have between people in private? If what you're saying is so mean and ugly that it couldn't be said in front of the person, right? Then maybe we should work on what you're saying. Now, I know that's a very hard thing to do because we have our frustrations, and there's times where we voice our frustrations and vent towards one another. But this is the basic idea. He also says this in verse 14, nor place a stumbling block before the blind. Now, notice how this plays into what he says in verse 13 about oppressing your neighbor and robbing him. He said up there a while ago about dealing falsely. Just because someone doesn't recognize that you are getting one over on them doesn't make it right. Just because somebody's blind doesn't mean you can make mean gestures at them and be okay, right? Well, he didn't see it. Well, that's not a good excuse, right? Just because somebody didn't see it or hear it or wasn't right there affected by it, you're still saying something about your God when you behave in that way. You're still a representative of him even when nobody else is watching. As you move on down through the passage, you just have more and more commands along this way. You should not be partial. You should not do injustice in judgment. You should not be partial to the poor nor defer to the great, but you are to judge your neighbor fairly. In other words, in the court, it doesn't matter who has the money and who doesn't have the money. Everybody should get fair judgment and justice. Does you think so? Leviticus, isn't that just such a primitive old book that nobody needs anymore? No. Come on now. Who in our society doesn't need verse 15, right? How many politicians and rich people and billionaires and CEOs and get away with all kinds of things, whereas people that are poor could never get away with those same kind of acts, right? People that are in the middle or lower class couldn't dream getting away with some of the things that the rich can get away with. It's in our society, it's more about who can hire the better lawyer, not about getting a just sentence for the one who commits the crime. And that's a shame. And so people who talk about the book of Leviticus as just being something that's way back there, not relevant for today, may have never actually read some of these sections of the book. They read all the things about the blood and the guts and the whatever, and they just put it aside, when really you have an honor code tied into Leviticus that tells you the proper way to form a society. Imagine how the world would be if everybody lived according to how this chapter talks about. Don't talk bad about each other. Don't be mean to a blind man just because he can't see the mean things that you're doing. Don't cheat your neighbor on a sell. Don't rob your neighbor. Don't withhold wages from the person that you fired. I mean, if everybody lived in that way, right, and everybody was paid what they were doing, things like that, think how much better the world will be. Okay, verse 17. You shall not hate your fellow countrymen in your heart. You may surely reprove your neighbor, but not incur sin because of him. You shall not take vengeance, nor bear any grudge against the sons of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. See, right within this whole thing is the heart of Christianity. The two commands that Jesus gives, love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself, comes from a book that is seen as distant and far back there and primitive and barbaric and all these types of adjectives. All right. Moving on down, just again, you see it. I'm the Lord your God. 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 All the way down through here. He's teaching them things that they can do to stand out from everybody else around them, to accurately be a representation of God. He says, when a stranger resides within your land, you shall not do him wrong. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as a native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. In other words, there's people that are going to come among you to buy, to sell, to trade, to do their craft or whatever, and they might look different than you. Guess what? You're to love them just the same. They might have a different culture than you, but guess what? You're to love them just the same. They might believe in a different God than you do, but you're still to show love towards them, and in doing so, you can preach God to them through your actions and through how you treat them. If they come and you say, get out of here, we don't really want your kind here, then what's that going to say to them about you? But most importantly, what's that going to say to them about the God that you claim to serve? God loves me, but he doesn't love you. He wants you to get out of here, right? That's what Israel would be saying if they kicked people out like that. And so what Leviticus is talking about here is loving everybody equally as one loves themselves, even if they are from Egypt, or even if they are from Ethiopia, like the Ethiopian eunuch. Even if they are a Gentile, we're still to love them the same. Verse 35, you shall do no wrong in judgment, in measurement of weight or capacity. You know who really needs to learn this? Frito-Lays. Because you buy that chip bag and you think it's so full and it's got like the bottom third is full of chips and the rest is nitrogen. And they say that's to keep the chips, tasting fresh or whatever, but you can't help but think they could add one or two more in there, Or those packages where it looks like there's an extra 3 hot dogs or 2 hot dogs on the end, but you flip it over and it's deep all the way to the end and then there's just like 2 on the front. And you're wondering, okay, where did the other space go that you could have put hot dogs in? And now this thing stacks weird on the shelf and I've taken up room in the refrigerator, right? Or when the companies, they go from having a box of 12 to a box of 11. Now this is not a joke. When they changed Hot Pockets from boxes of 12 to boxes of 11, my mom called the Hot Pocket company and said, listen here, I'm a foster parent. We have 12 people in our family. And because you've done this, now I have to buy 2 boxes instead of 1. And sure enough, they moved it back to 12. That's not a joke. I don't know if it was because of her or if it was because of multiple people, but anyways, she felt like that she had been done wrong in judgment, measurement of weight and capacity, and she got that fixed. But what this is saying is, don't hand somebody a roll of quarters that says $10 on it and it be $8 in quarters, right? This is pretty obvious. In their case, don't put these weights on the scale that say 5, 10, 15, whatever weight measurements, but really they are 3, 7, 13 to try to get a little bit more money than what they should give you. You shall have just balances, just weights, a just ephah, and a just hin. I am the Lord your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt. You shall thus observe all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them. I am the Lord. Taking this, of course, to the first century, if we don't love our neighbor as ourselves, if we don't love God with all of our heart, if we don't do the basic things that God has told us to do to produce the fruit of the Spirit in our life and to share His love towards those around us, then what are we saying about God? How can we honestly wear that name Christian? This is why Jesus' entire ministry was directed Jesus' ministry wasn't, when he was getting on to people, right? He wasn't getting on to people who everybody knew were sinners. He didn't come out and say, you publicans and you harlots, right? See, they knew that they were sinners. Everybody knew they were sinners. And Jesus ate with them at the tables to try to show them a better way to lead them out of their sin. But what was Jesus always railing against? You Pharisees, you scribes, you hypocrites, people that thought that they were, basically their only reason for pointing out sin was to make themselves feel good and make themselves feel holy and pure. And we need to make sure not to fall into that same category. There are certain sins that we pick out more than others, and oftentimes that's done to make ourselves feel holy and pure. But one thing that the scriptures call us to do is not crucify others, but crucify ourselves. Deal with things that hit us close to our heart and not just talk about what everybody else is dealing with. That's the problem that the first century saints got into. See, when Jesus came to preach, he spoke kindly to those who were sinners, who recognized that they were sinners, but to those who were holy and stand over there for I'm holier than thou, those are the ones that he went after because they were unevening the playing field, and Jesus was putting everybody on the same level. All right, chapter 20. This passage is about human sacrifice. Any man from the sons of Israel, verse 2, Any man from the sons of Israel, or from the aliens sojourning in Israel, who gives any of his offspring to Molech, shall surely be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I'll also set my face against that man, and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given some of his offspring to Molech, so as to defile my sanctuary, and to, here we go again, to profane my holy name. God says, I don't want you to offer up humans, your little children, as sacrifices. Not to Molech, not to me, not to anybody else. I've given you a sacrificial system. You know that it works. I've told you that it works. I've told you that you can. I've told you that you can trust in those things, and so you have no need to add on all these crazy things that are going to harm the people and bring shame upon me. Moving on, he says in verse 7 and 8. Now this to me was one of the most eye-opening passages in the book of Leviticus. You shall consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. You shall keep my statutes and practice them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. Now this is what's neat about this. What God is really saying is, all these rituals and purifications and things like that you're doing, they're not really the thing that sanctifies you. Anybody can go through those motions. Really what it is I'm the one who sanctifies you. I'm the one who makes you holy. Even with this extent law code, with all these rules and regulations that you're to follow, at the end of the day, I'm still the one that makes you holy. And this is why the psalmists and the prophets are always talking to Israel about having a pure and a contrite heart, not being circumcised of heart and of ears, as Paul would say, as being honest in what they're doing. Remember what Hosea said, the Lord, quoting the Lord, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. At the end of the day, God's the one that makes them holy. All of this whole system was just to teach them how to love their neighbor as themselves and to love God with all their heart. This whole system was just to teach them how to live as a society and not to cheat each other out of business and hurt each other financially and be evil to each other and be evil to those that were dwelling in their land. This passage teaches us that the rituals and the law were not an end of themselves, but pointed to something greater. And it's actually, at the end of the day, the Lord who sanctifies. Taking this to the New Testament, we can understand this principle very well, because we learn from passages like Romans 5 and Romans chapter 8 that it is God's righteousness that saves us, not our own righteousness. If we count our own righteousness, we're all going to be lost. But it's Jesus's what Jesus did through the cross and the life that he gave and the love that God has for us. That's what saves us. Not something that we do. We simply are following God's commands, and in doing so, the Lord God sanctifies us. As we talked about with baptism on Sunday night, baptism is the working of God, not of man. And so through this passage, you can, of course, read all these details. He gets down to verse 22, and he says, You are therefore to keep all my statutes and all my ordinances and do them, so that the land which I am bringing you to live will not spew you out. So all this is to be done so that you'll remain in the land and keep the covenant that I've given to you. In Israel's history, later on, several hundred, rather almost 1,000 years later, this very thing is fulfilled. Israel spewed out of the land when the Babylonians come and take them away to exile, and they didn't return back to the land for 70 years. Furthermore, all this again is about standing out from the nations. Moreover, you shall not follow the customs of the nation which I drive out before you, for they did all these things, and therefore I have abhorred them. Hence I have said to you, you are to possess their land, and I myself will give it to you to possess it, a land flowing with milk and honey. Again, I am the Lord your God, who has separated you from the peoples. Therefore, he says in verse 25, you are to make distinction between clean animal and the unclean, between the unclean bird and the clean. You shall not make yourselves detestable by animal or by bird or by anything that creeps on the ground, which I have separated from you or for you as unclean. Thus you are to be holy to me, for I and the Lord am holy, and I have set you apart from the peoples to be mine. See, this is really just trying to teach Israel something about who they are and who God is. I've probably given you this example before, but we need to understand that that God here is talking to Israel in their infancy. And I have definitely given this example before. And when you're talking to a child, when the child is young, you say, as I've said before, do not get into the knife drawer. It's not until later in life, when the child is more mature and is able to receive the proper instructions on how to use the knives, that you say, okay, now you can open up the drawer and let me show you how to properly cut up an onion, right? And then you laugh as they start to cry, because of the onion. You say, ha ha, that happens to everybody. So you start off with a no, with a very, this is black, this is white. This is yes, this is no. And then later on, now you say, okay, yes doesn't always have to be yes, and no doesn't always have to be no, but let me show you how to work with this. And so what God is doing in the Old Covenant is saying, clean, unclean. Here's what you do, here's what you don't do. And in the New Testament times, Jesus comes along and says, well, if your ox is stuck in a ditch, obviously you don't have to abstain from work on the Sabbath, because you need to pick the ox up out of the ditch. You don't want it to die. And obviously, if you're hungry, it's okay to pick corn on the Sabbath, because at the end of the day, this isn't Sabbath wasn't made for man, but man for the Sabbath. And on and on and on he goes, and Paul as well, and his various teachings and the experience that Peter had on the house with the household of Cornelius as well. So the whole part of this, the whole point of this, is to set them on a proper path so that they can receive the new covenant later. He's got to work with them in the yes and no and in the black and the white before he can introduce to them some of the gray later on in their life. At the end of the day, all this is so that they will properly represent who God is. For I, the Lord, am holy. And that is Leviticus 17 through 20. Next week, we will do chapter 21 and the feast days. We've never studied those before, have we? Yeah, we studied, 7 weeks of feast days? But we're only going to do 1 week of feast days this next time. We're not going to do the whole thing over again. We'll just kind of give a refresher on that, and then we will keep moving forward. All right.